You figure A to B, this should be easy. There's still so many little pit stops, little turns. I've tempered my expectation. I know where the beginning is and I know where the end is, but the road between is not my path. I don't get to control that more often than not. The Bible says, man makes his plans, but God guides his steps. So it's like, I know what the layout is, but I'm not going to be able to control how God gets me there. What I've found is when, as an entrepreneur and, lots of strategic planning, and we get stuck looking into the 1 year, the 3 year, the 5 year, the 10 year. I think as entrepreneurs, we train ourselves sometimes to have bad habits that are good for business, but they're bad for our walk.
Welcome to the Exceptional Companies Podcast, a podcast for purpose-led entrepreneurs looking to master the art of buying, selling, or optimizing small businesses. Your host, Chris Seegers, founder of Exceptional Companies and author of Selling Main Street, has over a decade of experience starting, buying, and leading successful businesses. He's here to guide you through the complex world of business transactions and growth. Each week, we dive deep with actionable insights, expert interviews, and real-world strategies to activate and equip you to live exceptionally and build exceptional businesses. Now, let's dive into today's episode. Here's your host, Chris Seegers.
Welcome to the Exceptional Companies Podcast, where we discuss how to buy, sell, or optimize your business. I'm your host, Chris Seegers. I'm joined by an amazing guest today. Mason, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll tell just a little bit about Mason, then I want to dig into his story. He is an incredibly authentic human being. That's really what attracted to me when I first met you. I was like, man, this guy's awesome. He runs a very successful company, Omega Metalworks, and he's got a crazy story. We won't get through it all since we do kind of a 30 to 40 minute podcast, and I want to pull some wisdom out of him, but he and his team can build any sort of metal application you ever think about. So Mason, let's dig right into it. All right. When you met me, we sat down at a coffee shop. You started telling me some of your story. It's a crazy story. It's a wonderful story. It's a story of redemption. So dig in where you want to, however you can, however you think it's useful for the audience.
Sure. From a young age, I was entrepreneurial, which I learned about legalities early on because, I was one of like the rich dad, poor dad kid. I was trying to make nickels out of like melting zinc and stuff like this. I figured out, and I learned that was called counterfeiting. And I was like, okay, we shouldn't be doing that. That proceeded to be like selling gum in junior high. And I was after a little entrepreneurial spirit from a young age. Raised in the church, I obviously knew I was learning right from wrong. And I was like, man, these are things I shouldn't be doing. So let's start trying to find ways to make them more legal. Well, lo and behold, I ended up growing up in Vegas. So try to talk about a challenging place to maintain morals and ethics in business while growing up there. So I quickly started getting into other business that was not legal. I became a drug dealer for a amount of time.
You became a drug dealer?
Yes.
So how does you just decided one day, hey, I'm an entrepreneur. The quickest way to make money is to sell drugs and not to do the legal thing. And there's no taxes on when you sell drugs.
Amen, right? That's the only benefit of that thing, that industry, I guess. So walking that out again, I was like, I went from selling gum in high school and then being in Vegas. By the time I was a senior in high school, I was getting great grades. I graduated with like a 4.3 weighted GPA. School was easy to me, so that meant getting in trouble was also easy. There's this appearance. If you appear one way but are doing other things, so it was deception. I learned this deception thing early on. At 17, my senior year, I got into it with my parents, my dad specifically, for one reason or another, and I moved out. And I moved into a house with a bunch of drug dealers who were all doing, 17 to 21 in this big house, and they were all selling different things. Well, I became the cannabis guy. So at 17 years old, I made this random decision to drive my butt up to California, to Humboldt County, and decided I was just going to find somebody and start somewhere. I didn't tell anybody. I drove up there by myself. I ended up meeting a guy. I found somebody, and I developed a connection. And over the next few months, that connection became very fruitful for me in the cash region, to where all of a sudden, by the time I graduated, I think I was making like $40,000 a month in Vegas, way more money than anybody my age should have had without a moral compass or And especially being in Las Vegas, that was.
But you were probably super responsible with it, right?
Oh yeah, sure. No, I was taking it. So it was real funny. Again, I learned the art of deception. I was like appearances. So I used the drug money and I put myself through college. I ended up going through a civil engineering degree. I got a job at a Fortune 500 company doing civil engineering. Still all the time, it was all like a fake front to what I was really doing. So I end up knowing that I'm in Vegas and I don't want to get in trouble for this stuff. So I started appearances of things. So I kept my job, and then I had a house here, and then I got another house here, and then I had another house there, and I live in this house, but I operate out of this house, and then I keep stuff over in this house. Well, obviously I'm bleeding. I'm like spending money all over the place, and I had no idea what bleeding was at that point in time. But, and then always the life of the party, always just taking whoever out. It was a road to a bad place eventually. And I also used that money at that time to start building up my band. So in Vegas, played music, and I found that, man, this is an easy way to grease the wheels to a record deal. And it was. So I started buying my way onto tours. So I have this life, this appearance of this life everybody wants. I'm making money hand over fist. Nobody really knows where it was coming from. Even my parents didn't really know what was going on with me. So I ended up hitting the wall in 2008. So I graduated in 99, went to college, got out of college by 2003. But by 2008, I was morally bankrupt. Like I had this life that everybody thought. I'm living in Vegas, nice house, nice cars, women around, plenty of money, this, that, and the other. But I was so empty internally. I wasn't rooted in anything. I thought everything that I was living was, it's what the world sells you. It tells you like you'll have all these things and you'll be happy. But I mean, we see that even with celebrities. That it's not true. It's not money. It's not fame. It's none of that. That isn't what gives you peace or purpose. So in 2008, my band was on its way up. We had upward trajectory, but my singer had a drinking problem, and my guitar player and my drummer were on heroin. And I wasn't in a good place either. Something happened. God stirred in me. And I was raised in the church. So, which that doesn't mean anything. Just going to church is just because I like the old metaphor. Just because you're in the garage doesn't make you a car. Just going to church doesn't make you a Christian. That just means that you can attend a schedule. I mean,
yep, for sure. It's another appearance thing too. Back to your keeping up appearances.
Again, the appearances thing. I learned, and that wasn't a good skill to have learned, but I learned it. Because I saw it in Vegas. That's a lot of people. It's all a front. It's all kind of, appear one way. It's like Instagram these days, or even most social media. It's like I appear this way, but that's not the truth. We always do our best case. So 2008, my band is on this upward trajectory, and I decided to leave. If we make it successfully and even bigger, one of us is going to die. Someone's going to end up somewhere, and none of it's good. And so I kind of broke down. I think I'd broken up with a girlfriend for like the 7th time at that point in time. I was just hitting the wall. And I went back to church. I went to the biggest church in Vegas that I'm aware of, Central Christian Church. Judd Wilhite is the pastor there, and he had a big background with recovery. He was an addict. I was never an addict. I never had addictive personality in that sense, but I was probably more addicted in the sense of to the lifestyle. So when I found out it was just empty, I went back to church. I had this breakdown moment where my mom had gone with me, and I'm crying and losing it in front of her. And she's like, "What's wrong?" And I was like, I'm just pouring it out to her. I was like, "I've been doing this. I've lived in this lifestyle, and we're in Sin City. I don't know. God is calling me, and I need to stop." So I made this determination that I was like, okay, draw the line. I'm quitting my band, quitting the job. And I talked to my parents, and an opportunity presented itself. So this is like the rubber band effect in my life, where it's like you pull it and then you pull it until it breaks.
Yeah.
So God didn't break it for a few more years. So that rubber band is me returning back to the world, and then back to my faith, and back to the world, back to faith. So I convinced my parents that I was a drug dealer, but I want to go legal. I want to do this right. So we decided to come to Colorado and open up some dispensaries. And I convinced my parents that this is a good idea because it was legal out here, and they believed in me, and they supported it. Come out here with my father, and we get 3 dispensaries going in 2009-10. That wasn't an industry I was supposed to be in, still out there in the world. So by 2012, we sold off our interest back to the partners. Okay, so get my money back out, walk on. the next thing I do is I go to work for a hydroponics store because I still don't learn my lesson. It's still like, oh, I want to hold on a little bit. I want to keep one foot out there. So I started running, I became like commercial sales for a big hydro store here in Colorado. It was the biggest that was in Colorado at that point in time. I ended up handling commercial accounts. So if you're spending, $10, $15, $20,000 in excess, you're coming to see me. That was good and bad. It was good because it made my sales and the company look great. Bad because I'm talking to all of the people that are spending that type of money that shouldn't be. There's only a handful of them that were legal operating dispensaries and stuff. I didn't know who was who. I ended up talking to a gentleman because I got real good at growing just anything. It didn't matter if it was tomatoes, cannabis, flowers. I just got really good at biochemistry for plants. This gentleman comes in and all of a sudden he's dropping like, $20,000 or more every other day. And he has these grows he tells me about and all these dispensaries. And I was like, okay, well, that's cool. I hear that same story multiple times. But he comes in one day and he's like, hey, how much do you charge for consulting? And I was like, well, I don't know. I just spitballed the number. I was like $150 an hour because I was like, I'm not quite a lawyer, but I'm up there. And he tells me he wants to pay me for 10 hours a week, which I'm like, what? You're going to give me $1,500 cash a week to go and critique his grows and tell him what bugs, what nutrients, what this, what that. So I started doing this. I go to these locations and when you walk in, you see cameras and rooms and everything. I was like, it was so big. I was like, this couldn't be fake. This got to be legit. He's showing me binders of paperwork, to keep this a shorter story. It was all fake. It was all right out in the middle of the open, so big that people all assumed that it wasn't fake, but he was trafficking all of that stuff out of the state every week, and I had no idea.
Wow.
Come to find
so another
out,
appearances, like keeping up appearances is just a theme in your life, huh?
Absolutely, right? Yeah, and that'll come up again. It'll come up again multiple times. And I think it's a good theme for this podcast is appearances. Don't be deceived by appearances. So I end up finding out, I started the hydro store in like 2014. By 2016 is when I met this gentleman. And I end up getting arrested in 2016 for the first time in my life because he had another property out east that had 10 greenhouses on it, and they were all for caregivers and this, that, and the other. Again, shows me all this paperwork explaining everything that's here. And he said, hey, we need help processing it for our clients or patients or what have you. And I was like, okay. So I go out to this property, no joke, there's 10 greenhouses. They each have 99 plants in them. These things are all like 10-foot tall trees. I was like,
wow.
What is going on? Okay, it's legal. Within an hour of setting foot on that property, the entire police force, SWAT, feds, everybody, helicopters, it was raided.
They were ready for you.
They were ready. From my understanding, they were observing this property, literally waiting for this day. It was an ongoing, they had been watching this gentleman for like 3 years.
So you also have really good timing.
Yeah.
That's another theme of your life.
So I end up on this property. I get arrested. I'm in jail for 24 hours, and so are like 15 other people that were there. We get out of jail the next day, and this gentleman is like, hey, don't worry about anything. I already got your lawyer hired, blah, 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 blah. So, okay, cool. I'm like, you better have this taken care of because I'm not doing anything wrong. I haven't done anything. That was October of 2016. So I have this court case open and I'm going. March of 2017, the feds raided every single person associated with him and their homes and everything, including me, my father, and my brother. And now we're all arrested and we're in Arapahoe County's federal holding facility, a part of a 16-person grand jury indictment. I land in jail in Arapahoe County by myself. They thought it was a benefit. They took me up there this long trip in just an undercover vehicle because the guy was like, hey, man, I'm doing you a favor. Let's have a conversation. I'm like, man, this is the last place that I want to have a conversation with anybody about anything. So I get up there. I don't know what I'm in store for. You kind of have all these things running through your mind about what jail is going to be like and so on. So I get in and I walk into this, it's called a pod. Once I finally get processed, it took like 2 days to get me into a pod. A pod at that Arapahoe County had 16 cells, 3 guys to a cell. So there's just short of 48 guys in this pod. Well, usually they bring a bunch of guys in together at one time. For whatever reason, I was brought in by myself at like 8 o'clock at night, So every eye in the place is on me when I walk through the door. And I'm like, okay. So some guy approaches me and what cell are you in? I say, and he's like, oh, that's so-and-so's cell. So I meet this guy, we go up there. And the guy's actually was rather nice. He was like, hey man, you need any like shampoo and stuff? I was like, I don't need nothing from you. Because I immediately was on defense. I was like, no, I'm not owing favors. I'm not playing games here. Well, the guy was nice enough and it was interesting. So the next day I wake up, starting to learn the ropes a little bit, and I see some guys having a Bible study. And I'm like, man, that's the only thing that I recognize here right now. So I sit down with these three guys. I'm the fourth, and we're having a Bible study. I don't even remember the particulars, but I was chiming in and giving feedback about specific scriptures and specific parts of the Bible. And he's like, oh man, that's awesome, man. I'm getting out tomorrow. Could you take over the Bible study? And I'm like, what? And I'm like, sure. What else am I doing? So I got a Bible while I was in there because you could ask the chaplain for a Bible. So I get a Bible and there's no commentary in it. I got no way to look up anything. It all was by the grace of God and the memory I had of David was in what part of the Bible and where did Solomon do that? And anyway, so I'm sitting here studying the Bible and you only get so much paper and a pencil and stuff. So I'm making these microscopic notes of like, I'm sitting down and I'm doing 12-hour-long Bible studies all day long to lead this little 10-minute Bible study at the end of the night right before they do lockdown. When I started this Bible study or gifted with the opportunity to take it over, there was only 4 of us to start with. By the time I got out of jail, which was about 30 days, over half the pod, 24 plus guys was attending this. And I mean, my cellmate was the first one out the door that was like, I don't believe in any of that stuff. I don't need any of it, blah, blah, blah. By the end of it, he was right next to me. He was like, oh, praise God. You know, he was just into it. And that was all the grace of God. I'm half Mexican. And so I ended up having this weird opportunity with the Paisas, the Mexican crew, and they respected me, which was weird, but it also gave me another opportunity to talk to them. So they started calling me Padre because they wanted to talk to me. It was just opportunity. It was so cool. So then after I get out of jail, I get processed out. They realize that I had nothing to do with the big grand jury indictment. So they give me this unsupervised probation for a year. Basically, they're like, you stay out of trouble and it goes away. And I was like, I never was in trouble, but okay. So I get out. I'm on fire for God at that point. And I'm like, I'm at the bottom again. I mean, they raided my house. They took every dollar I had. All this money I had saved up and stuff was gone. You know, this nest egg that Mason had built up is gone. I'm back down. I mean, I think I have $10,000 to my name. And I'm lucky that I had that. So I was also, again, appearances. Mason was also a firefighter at that point in time, a wildland firefighter, because got to keep up appearances. You know, you look like you're serving the community. When I got out of jail, they obviously kicked me to the curb. You can't be a firefighter with that kind of stuff going on.
And was that when Omega came into the scene, or how'd you get into that scene? Just to fast forward a bit.
It's almost there. So I ended up needing a place to live. I was living with a girlfriend at that point in time, which is also not something we should be doing. Cohabitation is an opportunity for sin. So I was sinning. She wasn't a Christian. We were not equally yoked. And when I got out, my landlord wanted to kick us out of the house. Everything was just falling apart. My girlfriend at that time had a friend who, her and her husband had a basement. And they gave us the opportunity to move into this basement. So we moved into this basement, not an optimal thing, moving into a basement versus our own house. So I get a job just doing whatever I can. I think I was working for an excavation company. That was going horrible because they were paying me $18 an hour or something, but I was driving all the way up to like way north, Thornton and stuff like that. I'm spending half my check in gas. So the husband of my girlfriend's friend says, hey, why do you keep doing that? I own a steel company. Why don't you come work for me? And I was like, you're a whole lot closer and whatever. So I started at the bottom. I think it was like $12 an hour or something like that as just a cut guy. Now I had a background in steel because of civil engineering. I knew structural, but I'd never actually physically worked with it. So I come to work for him and I'm just a grunt, man. I'm the lowest man on the totem pole. And I had a buddy, Joe. Joe was my boss. Joe is now my partner in Omega. Joe was my boss and I was making cut lists for him so that he could weld together rail because Joe is an amazing welder, fabricator. He's just an amazing person. Within 3 months of me coming to work for this place, this guy ends up finding out that I have management experience. I know AutoCAD, which AutoCAD is a program that can be used for a bunch of CNC work, which he had just bought a plasma table and nobody knew how to use it. So I immediately figured out how to use it. have all this management. Within 3 months, he moved me into the office. Within 6 months, I'm the general manager. So the next 4 years, I worked for this guy, and we were decent friends, but I was doing the appearance thing again. I'm just appearing to be what he needed me to be to solidify this job. During those 4 years, he started removing himself from the company. Well, he's just naturally making me into a leader of the steel world. After the 4 years, my buddy Joe was working for the same company. He left. A bunch of my quality employees all left. They go to this other company, and they're like, hey, you really need to come over here. I'm like, nah, I'm loyal, nah. Eventually, finally, this dude doesn't show up to work anymore, really. He's basically like, you've got it. And he just starts spending the money. Well, then I'm like, I'm struggling over here running your company because you're spending the money.
Yep, for sure.
So I get offered a job for another company. I went ahead and went and talked to him, and they offered me like $30,000 more a year to just come over and be a project manager. And I was like, well, this sounds like a slam dunk. Less work, more pay, I'm in. So I go over to this company. I'm there for 6 months. Within the first 2 months, they put me on a project, the Pikes Peak Summit Complex. It's at the top of Pikes Peak. It's one of the most unique buildings in the world. I was the 4th project manager. I think one had a heart attack, one had a stroke, and one decided to leave before it happened, and then it landed to me. After a couple months there, I determined this project is a mess. It was highly underbid. They're getting taken advantage of by the GC. It's just a mess. I see the writing on the wall that this company isn't doing too well either. And so I started Omega with Joe as on April 1st of like 21, kind of as a joke, because like, hey, let's start this. And I'll get us some side work, just as a safety net in case something falls out again. By May, my current partners came to me and they're like, hey, that place that you were working, they're going under. And he wants to sell the property and the business and everything. Are you interested? We're interested if you're interested in running it. And I was like, well, I'm interested in running it. And he was asking some like $3 million purchase price or something like that. And I laughed so hard because I was like, well, I ran your books for years. The company ain't worth that. Word of advice to any young entrepreneur: paying nothing on your taxes is not advantageous.
That's right. You can't get a multiple on cash that you don't pay taxes on. So we've actually had that with potential clients where they're like, this is what's on my books, but this is what I have in my safe. And I'm like, you're not going to be a good fit for us as a client. If you're running your business that way, you're doing some other things that aren't going to set up a buyer for the right transition.
Yeah. Multiples of zero, no matter how many times you multiply zero, it's still zero. So that was when I ended up coming back to the guy. I was like, well, I'm the wrong person for you to hope to get that out of. I will tell you that we settled for a pure asset purchase. I was like, I'm not interested in your name or anything like that. The asset purchase, let me see if I can do the math. I think we finished like a 20th of his asking price. So because
which was probably the fair price.
Totally.
Yeah, for sure.
Between that and a purchase on the property that we were good to go. I have 3 outside partners. We'll call them the angels that, very well off, multiple companies, somewhat like yourself. And this was just another opportunity for them to put an operator in place that they knew could be successful. And that's what we did. So we had a vision at the beginning of that it was going to be, we would do, say, $5 million a year or something like that was the opportunity here. Well, we're already meeting and exceeding that. And it's all by God's glory that the way that this has happened, because I had no idea what was going to happen here. We have 2-3 years of slow growth, and that's just not what's happened here.
Okay, so let's pause there and recap. Okay. So you start selling gum, then you sell drugs, then you go to prison for not the thing that you should have gone to prison for. Then you get out of prison after really finding a deeper relationship with Christ and have kind of a bunch of different experiences, and then start this company that's over 5 million in revenue and thriving. So let's think about, all right, lessons. Like, what are some of the big takeaways as you look back 5 years, 10 years on that? Because I think that's a crazy story, but I think everybody's got their story. That's what I love about this podcast, is everyone has a story. And I've been doing a lot of reflecting on just the things. Every year I journal a ton. And then I go back through my journals and I try to pull out, what is God showing me? What are the things I learned? What are the things I didn't learn that I should have learned? So let's talk a little bit about that. What are some of the big things that came out of that?
So what were the main takeaways of the last 5-10 years? One was transparency. And that's why we kept talking about the appearance of things. look through the appearance of things. Not everything is what it appears, and it requires digging. And you know me with a messianic mindset. I like to dig. And even with the drug dealer stuff back in the day, there was no mentor that I could go to learn how to do that. So I had to dig. Well, that gave me a good mindset for learning how to, hey, I'm not that type of person. It's like, oh, I can't figure out how to do this. No, it's like, cool, I've hit that wall. Let's figure out how to climb it, go under it, or go around it, go over it, whatever it is, we'll figure it out. So that's been a good, really good lesson. Appearance too, and even for me, knowing that I was faking the funk, I'm a huge believer, and I teach my guys here, it's not real unless it's in writing. Conversations are pretty empty. Follow up with emails and so on and so forth. Dig and find some truth to it just because somebody tells you something. And I think we have a lot of problem with that worldwide right now. So many people will be like, the sky is purple. And they start running around. They're like, oh, the sky is purple. I don't care that it looks blue. It's purple. I've read something that says it. And I'm like, let's back that up a little bit. And even with scripture, I like to be like, I don't like to nerf the Bible and say, oh, I found this one scripture that gives me this aspect. Be like, no, God's word is consistent. So if it's in one place, we're going to find a few more times where there's evidence of this. And it's the same thing. Transparency, dig, find the truth. Don't just believe everything at surface value.
Yeah. And I've talked to a lot of our team too, like, especially with performance, team members that aren't performing well, and we're coaching them and they're like, oh yeah, I'm going to do this. I'm going to show up on time. I'm going to do this. And I'm like, guys, action is the only proof. So if you're here on time, you're here on time. But if you tell me you're here on time and you're not here on time, you could tell me 100 times and it's still action is the proof. And I think too, like, finding people, and this is what I strive for, integrity means you're the same all the time, right? Like you're the same wherever you are, and trying to find people that have integrity. We all struggle with different facets of that in our life, but trying to find people that are the same in church, in business, in their marriage, with their kids. But I agree with you, like really digging in, because there's a lot of folks that on first glance, you're like, wow, these people are incredible. And you journey with them, and we're all flawed and fallen, but there's folks that are really striving to, hey, I want to do this through Christ, or I want to just keep up the appearance, and I want to have the appearance of that. So
do you like what you hear so far? Make sure you never miss an episode by clicking the subscribe button now, and check out our website, www.excoadvisors.com. This podcast is made possible by listeners like you. Thank you for your support. Now, back to the show.
What else, man? That's a really good lesson.
I think this brings me up to a point of where it was like, okay, cool. Now I have Omega. I've started Omega. And when I got out of jail, I ran to church. I went to one of the local churches here in the Springs, and I became a part of it. I was in my 30s at that time. I mean, I joined all the way, and I was part of the 2030s group. I was Bible studies, mentors, meeting with the pastors, accountability central. Like, I subjected myself to everybody. I wanted full transparency. Mason is no longer multiple people. He is one person, like you were just talking about. I didn't ask God about my company. Like, that's not where I was in my walk yet. I believed in God, and I was still learning some lessons. So I didn't ask God, should I start this company? But I named it Omega because Alpha, Omega, and I believe that this is the finality where I'm supposed to work. Everything that he's going to do for the rest of my life stems from this opportunity here that he's given me.
Interesting.
This is his company. I'm merely a steward of it. Even the logo that I have for Omega Metalworks, you've seen before. I have the 3 hoods on there as a symbol of Trinity.
Yep.
And then the Omega. So wearing it, and even on our business cards, Ephesians 2:10, which is Christ created us for these works. We have things to do. And that's what I built the company based on, without talking to God about it. So he had set the seed in me.
You're like, I'm going to build this. Can you just bless it?
Yeah, right.
I've done that many times.
Is this how you're finally going to make me wealthy? And I'm like, okay, again, the direction was wrong. The mindset was wrong. So I get into this, and out the gate, I'm workaholic. I'm getting it. I mean, I'm working 6 to 8 p.m., 6 in the morning, 8 p.m. Me and Joe were getting it. I started abusing energy drinks. I went and got an Adderall prescription. I didn't need that. And I was like, because I'm going to stay on this. I'm working for God. I'm firing away, And I'm like, why am I having sleeping problems? Why is my anxiety through the roof? Again, doing this by my power.
Oh, yeah.
So the first year of work was we did great. I mean, I think our first year was a little over 1.2 million. which, I mean, that's insane. I didn't think I was going to do $1 million in a year out the gate. I was like, oh, we'll be lucky to break a couple $100,000, but God provided. So I'm figuring out all this high stress and just problems. And I get married. I meet my wife throughout this process, and I get married too, to add that on there, which wasn't more stress. My wife was really good. She just has a huge heart, strong Christian, raised in the church the right way, not just going to church, but being a part of it.
Yep.
And she has a beautiful voice, went to college for worship ministry. And so I meet my wife and we start walking this faith walk out together. Well, I'd never treated any relationship the way that I did with her, which was like, hey, I'm going to treat this the way the Bible says to. Keep myself to myself until we're married. And so we set boundaries up that were painful to me initially, because I told her, I was like, look, I'm an extremist. So if our skin and our tongues touch, then everything else is going to happen. And I don't have a good no. So we can't do that. So we need to sit probably on opposite ends of the couch for the next 2 years.
So creating some structure. So I want to ask a question, because you brought something up that's really interesting. So if you think about a young faith-driven entrepreneur, how do you balance, the action with giving it to God? Because that's been something that I struggle with on a daily basis, right? Even when I have a good connection to God, it's like you have a week and you're just like, oh man, this didn't work out. We didn't get that job, or this person isn't. And then pretty soon I'm like, hold on a second. I did what I could control. And so all that means is I don't trust God. If I didn't get the result I want and I'm frustrated by it, but I've done everything I can, then it just means I don't truly trust God. So what are some things that you've learned in that walk? Because for me, that's a weekly thing that I've been really praying over and saying, hey, God, I do want to just steward this. And I want to give everything I do as just a beautiful sacrifice to you. But I also don't want to be stressed out about the things that I can't control.
That's literally like the current lesson I've been learning all year. I've talked this out with some of my fellow C12ers, you and other business owners. The entrepreneurial spirit can almost be damaging in a sense, because you need to make sure of what the target is. So with the entrepreneurial spirit, if the target is money, that's going to lead you down a treacherous road to where obviously there isn't enough money to fulfill the desire of money. So just trying to learn through that process what is important. And I think you know this, but for the listeners, one huge impactful thing, and that will lead to the answer to your question for younger entrepreneurs, was in last year I had the opportunity to go to Israel, and seeing the Holy Land was mind-blowing. It opened my eyes to more. We can do another conversation someday about what that was. My takeaway from that was the Mason that went to Israel died over there because he needed to. He was stressed out. He was trying to control everything by his own power. He was trying to split the difference with God and be like, God, you take 50, I'll take 50. That's not anywhere in the Bible. God gets all of it. It's all his, and it's all by his accountability, his structure, his allowing us to do things. So what I've learned is not one single time that I've made a plan has it ever gone to that plan. Not once, not one single time. Even the simplest things of some of the projects we do, you figure A to B, this should be easy. There's still so many little pit stops, little turns. I've tempered my expectation. I know where the beginning is and I know where the end is, but the road between is not my path. I don't get to control that more often than not. The Bible says man makes his plans, but God guides his steps. So it's like, I know what the layout is, but I'm not going to be able to control how God gets me there. What I've found is when, as an entrepreneur and lots of strategic planning, and we get stuck looking into the 1 year, the 3 year, the 5 year, the 10 year. I think as entrepreneurs, we train ourselves sometimes to have bad habits that are good for business, but they're bad for our walk.
Oh, I love that. Yeah.
I think I've been learning that you need to have boundaries. You need to set boundaries for yourself, or you'll wander off too far. And I was talking with my wife the other day, and I was like, babe, you know that I can do anything I want to do. I could be a billionaire if I want to. I could be a trillionaire if I really wanted to. I said, but at what cost?
I think that is really good guidance for young entrepreneurs. We have this tool called the Clarity Tool, and it walks you through your purpose, your identity, your core values as really, the guiding light and the guide rails on how you're going to do life. And then it helps you start establishing some plans, but we start with faith first, and then family second, And then your fitness, actually your health third.
Yeah.
And then the finances or business fourth. So it's, hey, if my connection with God is not great, my family's not going to be great, my business is not going to be great. So dial in my connection with God, then my wife second, then my kids, and then my fitness, right? If I'm not healthy, if I'm not putting the right things into my body and exercising, I won't show up in my marriage with my kids or in the business. And then really the business and the finances is way down. And I have a great guy out of Midland who's just been tremendously successful. And he's like unabashedly with his business. He's like, guys, it's faith, family, and business is way down there. And they're massively successful. And he even, one thing that I thought was just beautiful is when he fundraises, so if you're wanting to get into oil and gas development, he's like, all right, Mason, tell me how you give your money and your time. And if you're like, well, I don't really, I don't know. Sometimes I give money to so-and-so and whatever. He's like, you may not be a fit for us. So he actually gauges his investors based on their giving. Because once again, action is the proof. If they're like, hey, I'm generous, then he's like, great, let's go make a bunch of money together and then let's go give it away, right? Let's go steward it. He's actually giving his entire company away, which is our plan as well, is to build these and then transition them either through a donor advised fund or ESOP or something. So I love that, man, just really finding that identity. They're young entrepreneurs, and I was this way 100%. It's way easier to have goals that are money. First, we got to get this. We need to make 100 grand. Then we need to be a millionaire. Then we need our passive income to be 100 grand. Then we need this. Then we need this. And once again, like possessions are not bad. They're not a bad thing, but they can become a bad thing if they are your focus.
I think that idle stuff, you need to check your
100%
regularly.
100%, man. And even we were talking about this last week. Your idols could be your kids. Right? It could be, hey, you actually aren't spending enough time in the business because you're totally focused on your kids and, doing crazy sports every night and that sort of thing. And so we're constantly looking at like, where are we aligned? Are we aligned with Christ at the center and everything's kind of around that? Or has something else become the center? I mean, once again, that's how we spend our time. However you spend your time, that's where your priorities are.
What you spend your money and focus your time on, that's where your heart is. Whether your words are secondary, your actions speak.
Yep.
So,
I love it, man. Okay. We're going a little bit long, so let's wrap it up. Two questions to wrap it up for our listeners. One is any parting wisdom that's just top of mind. And then the second is, are there any resources for faith-led entrepreneurs that you're like, hey, you should really check into this, or just books or things that you're loving right now?
So I've got a great one because I've been wrestling with it. Joy and happiness is the one that I have for advice for young entrepreneurs. Happiness comes from happenings, things that happen. Happiness and joy being two different things. So your happiness tied to things that will happen with your company, weigh those heavily. Make sure that you're not tying them to like, I'll be happy when I make $1 million or when this happens or when that happens. Think of it as fishing. You're tying all your happiness to a fishing line that you're throwing way out there and you have no idea when that's going to happen. And that's not what God tells us to do anyway. You're supposed to be content today. We know joy. So I would say make sure before you get too far down the road into your company that you choose joy. You find something in your life that gives you daily joy before you start walking into a company that's going to try and steal that from you. I found months and months and months of anxiety and depression because I was tying my happiness and my joy to so many things out in the future that I may never end up with. It'd be like this toy or property or that vacation. It doesn't matter. That's cool. Leave it at Jesus' feet and then live for what his will is for you today and be joyful today.
I love it.
Obviously, the one book, I would say the Bible. Dig into that thing. I'm highly suggestive that everybody, I have a messianic mindset. If the listeners don't know what that is, please look it up. And then I highly suggest, if you have the YouVersion app or if you're a Bible collector like I am, the CJB, the Complete Jewish Bible. I'm not Jewish, but I believe that the Jews are God's chosen people. And Jesus lived like a Jew, so we should probably follow a little bit of that. I would suggest just look at the CJB translation. It's mind-blowing because Hebrew is one of the only pictographic languages. The closest thing we could relate it to would be chemistry, where it says its name. I would look into that. And then Traction. The book Traction, the EOS system was mind-blowing for me. There's a statement from it that you're a tradesman with an entrepreneurial seizure. which means that there's a lot of us that want to think that we could go into business, and you're really good as a welder or an electrician or a plumber. You're working for this company, you're doing it, and you're like, I'm going to break out on my own. I think that's a good idea. Put the brakes on, do some due diligence, because there's insurance, payroll, building, overhead, lights. I mean, there is so many things that come out of left field that you didn't expect just because you were good at doing a trade. It takes a teamwork to make the dream work. So unless your company is a single man vertically integrated that I have very rarely ever seen, be careful thinking that you're going to be able to walk this out by yourself.
Yep, I love that, man. Yeah, we run EOS in all of our businesses, and that book was game changing for us and just gave us a system, and we've iterated on it and added a bunch of new tools. But the other thing that's really interesting, so we're building a tool called the Blueprint for an Exceptional Life. Yeah. And it's actually what we found with EOS and our operating system is the blueprint for building an exceptional business is like 90% the same as the blueprint for building an exceptional life. Sure. And so we've said like, hey, if you can actually tie those together, one of them is the curriculum for your team, for your staff, and also for yourself. The other is a curriculum for your business. And once you learn the tools, they cross-pollinate really, really well. So I love that, man. Well, go ahead. Any parting wisdom or other resources?
I was just going to say traction even spilled over into my personal life, not just my business, where I was able to sit down with my wife and we started doing strategic planning for our own, family life. Like, where do we want to be in a year, 3 years, 5 years? What's the goal? And then we take that prayerfully to God and be like, hey, here's what we've set out, but you're the one that's going to bless this and open these doors. And what I found is the more that I bring God into actually setting it at his feet, I've come the closest to hitting my actual plan with God involved in blessing that plan than I ever did in my life setting the plan myself and not including God. So
I love it. That's some great parting wisdom, man. Include God early during the entire process, often, every day. Pray without ceasing, man. Mason, thanks for coming on the show, brother. We'll have to do this again. Really appreciate you sharing your story, and I know it's going to help a lot of folks.
Please, Chris, I love talking with you. Thanks for having me, and I look forward to talking to you again.
I love it, man. Take care.
Thanks for joining us this week on the Exceptional Companies Podcast. Make sure to subscribe to the show on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, or via RSS so you'll never miss a show. While you're at it, if you found value in this show, we'd appreciate a rating on iTunes, or if you'd simply tell a friend about the show, that would help us out too. If you like this show, please reach out through our website, www.excoadvisors.com, for free tools to order a copy of Selling Main Street, or to sign up for our free webinar on how to sell your Main Street business.